Chapter 15, handle the events. How many of you guys are familiar with events in JavaScript? Everyone. Okay, perfect. So we don't need this. Okay, so event handlers. Event handlers can be used to handle and verify user input, user actions, browser actions, and so on. Some examples of these events include mouse events, keyboard events, browser events, and custom events. Okay, how many of you guys are familiar with the window object? Perfect. Even best. That's great. The window binding refers to a built-in object provided by the browser. Okay, it represents the browser window that contains a document. Calling its addEventListener method registers the second argument to be called whenever the event described by its first argument occurs. Okay. So here, you guys can see my mouse. Okay, perfect. So we have a p tag here with text within it. We attach the addEventListener to the window binding, and we're listening for the event click, right? Mm-hmm. And then what are we passing here for the second parameter?
Function.
Anonymous function.
Okay. And then what is it going to do when it's triggered?
Log you knocked.
You knocked. Perfect.
Do all listeners go up the window?
No.
Oh.
And we'll get to that
Okay.
next slide.
Just come in.
Okay, so events and DOM nodes. Event handlers are registered in a context, right? So as we saw in the previous slide, we added to the window object. The method can also be found on DOM elements and some other types of objects. Event listeners are called only when the event happens in the context of the object that they are registered on. Okay, it gets a bit complicated because we will talk about event bubbling. And so for the button, we're selecting it here and assigning it to a binding called button, and then we're adding an event listener to that button, right? Mm-hmm. So when we click it, it's going to log to the console, button was clicked, right? Button clicked. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So just so we all understand, where it says click right here, that is the event that it's listening for, right?
So as far as accessibility, the reason that addEventListener is on everything is because it comes down from window? I mean,
yes. So when you're talking
to create addEventListener, it's just automatically on button.
It's a method of. But
Of what?
of on DOM nodes.
Of what?
DOM nodes?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Now, what you were talking about, how it goes down and goes back up, yeah, that's called the propagation process.
Okay.
And we're going to cover that. I think I have a demo for that too, so it hopefully makes sense. I think you guys can explain it to me. So we also have something called the remove event listener. It does exactly what it's called, so I'm not sure what to explain here. The remove event listener method, called with arguments similar to the add event listener, removes the handler. Okay, and we have the function given to remove event listener has to be the same function value that was given to the add event listener. Okay, so
There type restraint on what you can put in an event listener? Does it have to be a function? If you try to pass a string in there, does it blow up?
no, it has to be the exact same function, and I'll show you an example because that's how it's targeted, so I can stop it. So to unregister a handler, you'll want to give the function a name once in the example, and I'll show you an example. So you're able to pass the same function value to both methods. Okay, so again, we have a button here, and then we have a function called once, right? When you call this function, it'll log to the console done, and then for that button, it will call the method remove event listener, pass the event. The event is listening for, and then once, right? Which is the function that we're referring to right here. Does that make sense? So we can see here, button, add event listener. When we click it, it's going to fire once. We go into this function, log to the console, and then it removes that event from that DOM item, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Perfect. I'm going to see a lot of cool things on Hack
Oh,
Day.
sure.
Sure. Perfect.
Understanding it and implement. That's
Well, that's true.
things.
That's true. Very true. Event objects. Okay. How many of you guys are familiar with event objects? One person. Okay. Well, that's good. That's good.
Like the target and the node.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So event handler functions are passed an argument. Okay. The event object. This object. So when you click on an element that has an event listener, right? You normally see something
You're
like
passing
E.
in the
Yeah. Right. So that's what we're talking about right now. Yeah. So this object holds additional information about the event. For example, if we want to know which mouse button was pressed, we can look at the event object's button property. Okay. And I believe I should have an example here. So for example, this is a mouse event, right? And it has all these different properties here. And one that we're gonna be talking about is button. So 0, 1, 2 represents the button that was clicked on your device, right? So let's go back. So we have an example here. We're adding an event listener to a button that will be triggered on mouse down, right? And it checks if event button is set to 0, or if it's set to 1 or 2, and then it logs into the console based on that, right? Does that make sense? Right? It's checking which button was clicked, right? Or I mean pressed. Last? Looks like you have a question.
Well, I'm curious, so, it has all these properties in this event object. How does it know, is mouse down like a built-in one? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't know how it, knew that even it was a, button click or a mouse click.
Right. So yeah,
Mouse down is
these are
built-in.
built-in events.
Gotcha.
Is there any other argument? I'm trying to remember,
I'll go back.
aside from event, that can be passed into that anonymous function. I only remember that, but
I believe there is a third one.
there's mouse down and event. But I meant the actual event, and it's fine. We'll see. I think I've only used it.
That's a good question.
Sometimes weird arguments though.
So event propagation, okay? Event propagation is a thing. Is a mechanism that defines how events propagate or travel through the DOM tree. And how it arrives to its target and what happens afterward. So there are 3 different things that happen, right? Capturing is going down the tree. When it gets to the target, that's number 2. And number 3 is when it goes back up, event bubbling, right? And we'll see a pretty immature. So again, capturing. It's going down to the target, right? Once it gets here, that's step 2, where it gets the target, and then event bubbling. It goes back up, okay? We have a demo that hopefully it'll make it make sense. Here. This right here.
Come on.
Okay. Can you guys see that? So for this purpose, you guys need to see the right side, right? So let's zoom in. Okay. All that's on here are 3 elements. We have a div, paragraph tag, and an anchor tag, right? Anchor tag is inside of the paragraph. Paragraph is inside of the div, right? Each one of these has an on-click event, right? So I have an event listener on it, right? So when I click the anchor tag, what do you think is going to happen?
It sends it up to the P one.
And send the result back up to
Okay,
the P.
so I'm going to click on it. So it says bubbling A, right? That's what it's supposed to say for the anchor tag. I'll press OK. But then I also get bubbling P, okay? That's for the paragraph tag. And then I also get bubbling div. Okay, do you guys know why that happened?
Because you clicked on all of those elements?
Event bubbling, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it went down to the target and then it took it back up, right? But it's like you said, since we clicked the anchor tag
It's inside.
and it's inside all those elements that also have on-click event listeners, right?
How do you distinguish it? If you have some, I don't know, container that you're wanting to do something when you click on it, but then you have a container inside of that,
Right.
how do you distinguish it?
So the cool thing is that the event object has a lot of properties. For example, one of them is like he said, target. You can see what you're targeting,
So
right?
you'd have to do like a if
Right,
this.
exactly,
Okay.
yeah. You can go as far as looking at the tag type and seeing, okay, if you're an anchor tag or a P tag or a div tag, only then can you do something, right? But these are things that you run into that you're like, why is it doing that?
It's also just an event or a method overriding. If you think
Yeah.
of an object oriented, everything doesn't inherit from
Java
everything,
stuff.
but from the main object, everybody's got an event listener.
Right.
And so it knows it's containing parent object, but it's doing some kind of weird.
Yeah, but
mix of
in
that.
Java or other whatever, it doesn't trigger the
All of them?
event from the object, the parent object.
Um,
This is kind of unique. Well, the
From a pure inheritance point of view, it does. So if you have inheritance hierarchy and you don't fill out the method on the bottom that they all inherit, it will go up the chain until it finds one that's got an implementation.
well, it'll come down from the, but if you have a virtual method that you've overridden, that's going to trigger that one, it's not gonna trigger the one above it. I mean, so, you know what I mean, like, you've overridden that method, and so it's not gonna trigger up the chain. You're not gonna trigger 3 events because, you know, you're 3 objects down. The problem I think that I would run into is if you had 3 buttons inside of this div, and each one of them had, you know, a event handler on it or whatever, but you also wanted something to happen when any one of those got triggered, you'd have to distinguish at the div level because it's going to trigger that event listener as well, right? So you'd have to say,
Right, now, think about this as an edge case. I can't imagine a moment where I've seen the div, the paragraph tag, and the anchor tag all of a sudden have an on-click, right?
but you might have a span with 3 buttons in it, right?
Right, but the span doesn't have an on-click event listener,
It
right?
doesn't.
No.
Because it's not a
It shouldn't.
container.
It's the
It's not a
buttons,
container.
right, it's the buttons that are gonna have it normally.
Yeah.
Right?
The reason that's happening is because you have P and D div,
Right.
and those are containers.
And the whole reason they have it is to
Yeah.
illustrate the whole concept.
Yeah.
So,
So when you click on one, you're clicking on both.
yeah, if you see this in any production work, that's a deeper problem, right? So, yeah. But the concept, you guys understand it, so that's great. So let's go back. So again, capturing and bubbling. In modern browsers, event propagation proceeds in 2 phases, capturing and bubbling phase. But keep in mind, there is a second one, which is called target, right? It's when it gets to where it's supposed to go, and then it moves on to bubbling phase. So again, event capturing, so think about it this way. So all ancestors checked for on-click handlers first. And again, we're in the context of this, right? HTML body, we have a div with an on-click, and then a paragraph tag inside of that div with an on-click, okay? The div is checked for on-click handler, this handler invoked first, right? And then the P tag is checked for the on-click handler, and that is invoked second, okay? Now for event bubbling. P is checked for on-click handler. This is invoked first. Div is also checked for on-click handler. This is invoked second. And also ancestors checked for on-click handlers last. Okay? So that's exactly what we just saw in that demo. Okay? Any questions? Jonathan, you were very entertained. Oh my God, okay. Moving forward, default actions. How many of you guys have ever used prevent default? A couple of you guys, perfect, okay. So many events have a default action associated with them. If you click a link, for example, you'll be taken to the link's target, right? If you press down at the arrow, the browser will scroll down to the page, or if you right click, you'll get the context menu, right? So we do have a method called prevent default. You can prevent the default action by using the method prevent default on the event object, right? So a lot of the times you'll see it where you click on an anchor tag, and then you pass the event object into your function, and then you do e.prevent default, right? And then
If you define your own event listener, or sorry, event that you pass in there, does it automatically override the default one?
no,
So when
you have to go
both-
in there. Yeah, you have to go in there and prevent default, right? Now, one thing that the book does talk about is being careful about overriding expected behavior. What it says is careful with breaking expected behavior, not good practice. Some events can't be intercepted at all, right? So for example, one of the events you can't intercept, for example on Chrome, when you do like Control W, you can't intercept that one, right? So you'll run into these issues. Good. So keyboard event object. Keyboard event objects describe a user interaction with the keyboard. Each event describes a single interaction between the user and the key, or a combination of a key with a modifier key on the keyboard. And we'll take a look at the different modifier keys. But keep in mind that modifier keys also apply to the keyboard and the mouse. So you can utilize them in conjunction with any mouse input. Okay? And an example of that is like on Chrome, when you press Control and click on a link, it opens in a new tab, right? Okay, key event types. The key event type identifies what kind of keyword activity occurred. So there's key down, key press, key up. Anyone know any more?
I just learned one.
Oh, just one more?
Mutation observer.
Oh, nice. Okay. Anyone else? That one's a pain, actually. You want to give a talk on it later?
I think that's why React uses the senses for changes in the DOM. if I recall correctly.
Focus maybe? On
Yeah,
the
there are focus events. I don't think we covered those today though, but it is a type of event. So, yeah. So again, so we have an example here. Let's take it back. So we have window, and then we add the add event listener method. Sorry?
So even if your mouse moves, there's an event.
Yeah, and then
You don't
we're
have to
listening-
register it, but it's-
Yeah. So we're listening for key down, and we're checking if the event key equals V, right? So we're checking it if we press the V button, right? And if it does, it just goes in and says document.body.style background, changes the background color to violet, right? Now, what do you think happens in the second event listener when you let go of the key?
Takes away the background style element.
Right, perfect. So when you press the key button, you press it, changes the color to violet. When you let go of the key, changes it back to like blank, right? Perfect. Anyone have any questions about that? It's pretty straightforward, right? Cool. Okay, modifier keys. Modifier keys such as Shift, Control, Alt, and for those of you guys on the Mac, it's called Meta. Wonderful. Generate key events just like normal keys. But when looking for key combinations, you can also find out whether these keys are held down by looking at the Shift key, Control key, Alt key, and Meta key properties of keyboard and mouse events. I don't expect you guys to memorize all of that, right? When you guys are working on events, you will look at the reference. Usually you'll be looking at like MDN or something. They have wonderful documentation for events. So here's an example of using a modify key, right? You have a paragraph. It says press Control space to continue, and then we're attaching it to window. Now keep in mind, a lot of these examples do attach it to window, but the more specific you can be, the better. This one makes sense, but just try to be as specific as possible when attaching event listeners. You don't want to attach it to like the body element, right? And then everything's triggering that event. So just keep that in mind. Window.add event listener, and we're listening for key down, right? And then we go on to check if the event key is set to, what do you think it's checking for right here?
Space.
Space?
Yeah, that didn't make any sense to me, but
Me either.
I thought you would call it a key. I believe I've used it and it's like space or something, but that's the way the example was written. And event.control key, right? And then it'll log to the console continuing. So yeah, I don't know best. I can't defend this one. Can't do my
I mean, there's not like an enum or something that's specific other than the character 32, you
There-
know? I mean, it's
there must be.
something, I don't know.
There must be. I mean, if the Mac key got one, the space should have
Right.
one. So just saying. Not talking any mess. Jonathan. There are currently two widely used ways to point at things on a screen. Mice, right? Including devices that act like mice, such as touchpads and trackballs, and touchscreens. These produce different kinds of events. Okay? How many of you guys have worked with touchscreen events? Okay, I didn't expect many of you guys, so that's wonderful. Okay, cool. Okay, so mouse clicks. Pressing a mouse button causes a number of events to fire. So you have the mouse down, and then when you let go, mouse up. Events are similar to the key down and key up. And fire when the button's pressed and released. Yeah, that's exactly what I just said. Perfect. These happen, you know what, I keep talking, and then I try reading as well, but it doesn't work out. These happen on the DOM nodes that are immediately below the mouse pointer when the event occurs, right? So again, nothing complicated, there's really no magic to it. You're telling the computer to do whatever you want when you want it to do it, right? Okay, these are some of the mouse events that we have. Mouse down, mouse up, mouse over, mouse out. That second one, mouse over, mouse out, is very interesting because the more precise you are with where you are adding that event listener, it'll target just that that box, right? That container. Yeah. So if you add it to the whole body, it'll trigger everywhere on the body. So you don't want to do that.
Your whole page.
Yeah. You also have mouse move. So when you move your mouse, it's going to trigger, right? You have click, context menu, and double click, right? We also have something called the which property. Click-related events always have the which property, which allows you to get the exact mouse button. And we talked about that, right? 1 is the left mouse button, 2 the middle button, and 3 the right button. Right? There are times where you want to check what button was clicked, right? Any questions about this property?
What about a scroll? You got one for scroll?
Yes, the scroll event. And I have an example for that one actually, which
I was
should be
wondering
pretty
if
cool.
there, I mean, other, I wouldn't say languages, there's other libraries that do like, you know, are good for mobile with like drag and swipe
Yeah.
and so on and so forth,
Mhm.
gestures and stuff.
Let's not look at this window. I think I forgot to do something there. Touch event support. Okay, so for the longest time, touch events were not really supported out of the box. It relied heavily on those events that we have for clicks, right? So if you noticed, out of the box, without having to do anything fancy, where you're building a site and you have buttons and you go onto your phone and you test it and it works, it's not because you're a magician, right? It's because thankfully they're supported by the click events, okay? So to this day, they support touch events, simple ones, such as pressing a button. If you tap a screen, you'll get mouse down, mouse up, and click events. There are now specific event types fired by touch interactions, okay? So these are touch start, touch move, and touch end, okay? Not sure how many fancy things you can do with these, but
So that's kind of like the click a button, let go of a button, or the swipe feature.
right.
Would be the
Now,
touch
keep
move.
in mind that one of the differences is that with the mouse, you only have one, right?
Yeah.
Unless for some reason you have like 2 connected to your computer, I don't know why. But with a touch screen, you can have multiple fingers touching the screen, right? So you can see when a finger touches the screen, when it lets go. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. Okay. Scroll events. So whenever an element is scrolled, a scroll event is fired on it, right? This has various uses, such as knowing what the user is currently looking at, or for disabling off-screen animations, or showing some indication of progress by highlighting part of the table of contents or showing a page number, okay? So let me, try to zoom in. Okay, can you guys see that? Is that better? Yeah, we can see that. Oh, okay, thanks guys. Okay, perfect. So there is CSS, we have HTML, we have some JavaScript at the bottom. Okay, we have some CSS here, an idea of progress, and then we're doing some wonderful things to that, right? Lots of magic there. So let's close that up. We also have a div called progress with we have a div with an ID of progress, right? Now we have the JavaScript. So can someone tell me what's going on here? These 2 lines.
Pending checks. Pending
Thousands.
Yeah, so we're appending something, right? So how many times are we appending it?
1,000.
1,000 times. Wonderful.
At least you have spaces.
Yeah. And you guys will see it right now. We also have a binding called bar, and it's selecting the div with ID progress, right? And we're going to use it here. We're going to do window.addEventListener. We're listening for a scroll, and we're going to trigger this anonymous function, right? So what it does is it has a binding called max. It looks at the height of the body on the document, and it takes away the inner height, right? And then it says bar.style.width. So it's going to set the width for the bar and set it to the page Y offset divided by the max, multiplied by 100, and that's the percentage, right? And what this does, as you are scrolling down, you have a little bar that keeps filling up until it makes it to the end, right? And as you scroll back up, it goes back down, okay?
The inner height and page offset is the window.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm. you guys can see the bar filling up, right? And then as you go back up, right? And just a few lines of code, so that's wonderful, right? Okay, and the code is right there as well, so we should have looked at this first. But there we go, live and learn. Load events. How many of you guys have seen the load event before? I know it's more than that, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, wonderful, great. Woke you guys up. So when the page finishes loading, the load event fires on the window and document body objects, right? This is often used to schedule initialization actions that require the whole, that's a hard word, the whole document to have been built, okay? There is also, this one I haven't used, but it's wonderful, I learned something. The before unload event, so when a page is closed or navigated away from, so when you click like a link and it's taking you away, a before unload event fires. The main use of this event is to prevent the user from accidentally losing work by closing the document, okay? So that normally gives you like a little prompt that asks you, are you sure you want to leave, or whatever the case may be for that browser. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Wonderful little method, I didn't know.
Or it's probably like preset to like cache save, so when you go back in and they're like restored copy.
No, from what I understood, I thought it was so that you don't leave without saving whatever you have, right? So it's like before you go, so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
Boolean or something, what's the-
Yeah.
Couldn't you also use it for cleanup events, like
Yeah.
unauthenticating or something? Like
Yeah, I mean, from what you said, you could probably use it to, once you detect that the user's leaving,
Yeah.
grab everything, save it, maybe a local cache or something, or send it back up to your server, I don't know, so. Cool.
Alright, that's the second. Combined did not.
So events and the event loop.
Corresponds to it.
Browser event handlers behave like other asynchronous notifications. They're scheduled when the event occurs, but must wait for other scripts that are running to finish before they get a chance to run, okay? So that can be a pain, because imagine if you have events that take a long time to finish, that's gonna hold you up, right? So when you do that, when you have something that's gonna be resource intensive and it's gonna take a long time, we do have something called web workers.
Wait a second. Can we back up a second?
Yep.
You said that it works like other asynchronous note stuff.
Right.
Well, I mean, if they're asynchronous, they shouldn't have to wait.
We're talking about the event loop. So remember how everything has to go into the queue and it has to wait for events?
Wouldn't that be synchronous?
It doesn't hold the rest of your application,
Oh.
but there's still the event loop.
I see. So the events are synchronous, but it doesn't lock up the UI.
Right, but the resources are still being used, right? So, again, we should have a presentation soon, as soon as someone wants to do it, on the whole event loop, and then memory and everything, so if any volunteers, fast, be wonderful.
JavaScript?
Come on. We've seen you with the shirt on, so I don't know what you're talking about. So web workers. For cases where you really do want to do something time consuming, these pretty much run alongside of the main process. So you want to do some time consuming thing in the background without freezing the page. Browsers provide something called web workers. A worker is a JavaScript process that runs alongside the main script on its own timeline. I think I just said the same thing. Wonderful. Okay.
It's almost like you read it.
Right? Yeah. Okay. So there
That's
will
not-
be.
That's not, it doesn't go in its own thread. which
From
is-
what I've read before,
Really?
before reading this, yes,
So that's how you do threading in JavaScript?
Yeah.
I guess so.
Huh.
Yeah. But we will have a talk on web workers, web sockets, service workers, worklets, and post message. Okay, these are a lot of cool technologies that I want to talk about, and it'd be wonderful for it to have its own talk. So, yeah. How many of you guys are familiar with like post message? Post message? That's fine. That's good. Worklets? Nope. Service workers?
Yep.
Some of you React people have at least heard it, so it comes with like CRA out of the box.
Yeah.
WebSockets, cool. And then now you heard about web workers, so awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of neat tools that you guys have at your disposal It's just a matter of, you don't know about them until you use them, right? So it's nice to know about them before you use them so you can actually think about something and build it. So. Okay, debouncing. Some types of events have the potential to fire rapidly, many times in a row, right? If you do need to do something non-trivial in such a handler, you can use set timeout to make sure you are not doing it too often. It's usually called debouncing the events. There are several slightly different approaches to this. And I have an example here. So we have a text area, and then we're targeting it here, so we can call on it. We have timeout, we're just initializing it. We add an event listener to the text area that fires on input. We're gonna clear timeout, which is called timeout, which is right here. Timeout equals set timeout, and we're gonna wait for 500 milliseconds, right? And it's gonna log to the console typed, okay? So that means it'll run what, every how long?
5 seconds.
500 milliseconds, right? If it were 5,000, then it would be 5 seconds, right? Okay, so do you guys understand why they do that, the debouncing? Right, to give it some buffer time, right? So it doesn't just keep going, right? Oh, and I guess we're done. Any questions? No? Any questions? Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, just in case you guys weren't going to clap for me, I clapped for myself. So.
Default clap.
Default clap.
We were watching the.
So just keep in mind, guys, for Hack Day, everything you guys saw today will be very useful, right? Because for Hack Day, you guys are doing like a kind of like Frogger game club. So you guys will be using keyword events, mouse events, all sorts of events. So you should probably look into that. Any questions? Perfect. Okay, I think there's pizza left, so you guys are more than welcome to get the rest of the pizza. Otherwise, you guys can network.
Literally just sit here going, yeah, I'm pretty awesome. I was just like, wait, what?
I even had to consider for a second.
Okay, I know there's something called double speak in politics, but
It's usually somewhere. I don't know. I appreciate the pizza that I just consumed.
So it was actually it was the documentary that went over like